Joining us today at ET Health World, we have two prominent and illustrious doctors from Bangalore to deliberate upon a very important topic: building resilience and combating with Parkinson's disease, the way forward. Parkinson's disease is complex. Just as each fingerprint is unique to an individual, so is the experience for those living with the Parkinson. In India, almost 70 people out of 1 lakh, both elderly and young, have been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. This is as per the International Journal of Nutrition, Pharmacology, Neurological Diseases. Let's go and interact with the doctors to get more insights on this neurological disorder. We have today Dr. Guru Prasad Ozurkar, Senior Consultant Neurologist at Columbia Asia Hospital, Yeshwanthpur, Bangalore. Dr. Guru Prasad has 15 years of experience practicing neurology in various hospitals and clinics. He has rich experience of deep brain stimulation in Parkinson's disease. Along with Dr. Guru Prasad, we have Dr. Raghuram G, who is working as a senior consultant neurosurgeon and spine surgeon in Columbia Asia Hospital, Yeshwanthpur, Bangalore, since 2008. He has been performing innumerable complex brain surgeries and all type of spinal surgeries, including advanced minimally invasive spine surgeries. And to begin with, I would like to ask Dr. Guru Prasad. Welcome, sir. The first question to you: can you tell us about the Parkinson's disease, its prevalence, and what is the impact of Parkinson's disease on quality of life and health resources? Over to you.
Parkinson's disease is one of the commonest neurodegenerative disorder across the world. It usually affects the elderly above the age of 60, 65. But we also come across younger people getting affected with that. So when I say neurodegeneration, it means that certain neurons which are responsible for motor activity, specifically speaking about in Parkinson's disease, the nigrostriatal neurons in the brainstem get degenerate over time. What it does is that the person affected with that becomes slow. They develop tremors, slowness in body movements, slowness in speech, and over the time they develop a change in posture, and their overall well-being comes down. So they require assistance at some stage in the course of the disease. So it's relentless. It's a progressive disorder. Because of the body movements getting affected with this disease, their quality of life suffers. They can't function normally like before. Their driving becomes affected. Their walking becomes affected. So it affects both their professional life and their personal lives. So that way, there's definite huge impact on their personal life, and also because the age group of 50, 60s is still professionally active. So the impact on the society also is huge. Coming to prevalence, it's considered because the age is a risk factor. Above the age of 50, various studies have been done in India and abroad. Various studies in city of certain populations like Parsis. The prevalence was considered as was seen as 70 in 1 lakh population. In various studies in South India and in Kashmir and in Delhi, they have seen anywhere between 15 to 70 to 80 per 1 lakh populations. That's the prevalence. But in certain European countries, the prevalence can be as high as 1 per 100 population above the age of 65 years. So this is about the prevalence of Parkinson's disease.
Okay.
And also because it affects the elderly, there is also they need to be on constant medications. There is also financial impact. So that way, the burden of the disease on the society at various levels is huge, and it's a challenge to manage this complex disease. And in Parkinson's disease, it not only just slowness of body movements, it also affects non-motor system. Like for example, they can have difficulty in passing motions. There is constipation. They can have urinary problems. They can have memory issues. So all this can affect in terms of impact. Burden of the disease is seen in various ways.
So, moving on, I just wanted to ask you, how can you elucidate about the stages of Parkinson disease? Like, if there is any stages, like how it is, and does every patient of this disease, what kind of progress is there? Are there any a typical form of Parkinson disease itself?
90% of patients with Parkinson disease do progress. They develop various problems at various stages. We use certain scales to monitor the stages. The commonest being Yawn and Yar scaling, which is a very simple scale. The Parkinson disease usually affects one side of the brain. So when you see a Parkinson disease, usually there is asymmetry. That means one side is affected more than the other side, either left or right. So when that is so, the symptoms are also one-sided. So when we measure the stages, they usually we say initially the unilateral disease, like you can have tremors in one hand or the other hand, or the slowness or decreased arm swing on one side. Then over the years, after 1 or 2 years, the unilateral disease becomes bilateral. That becomes stage 3. Then the axial symptoms, that means there is a stooping of the posture, there is slowness of walking. So we measure from unilateral, bilateral, axial symptoms. So the stages are like 1 to 5, and the last stage being where the patient requires assistance. So this is a simple stage. For neurologist and movement disorder specialist, we also use UPDRS scale, where we go into more specifics. What is the severity of the each motor component, how it affects their functional thing, be it eating, be it writing, walking abilities, day-to-day activities like cutting fruits. So all that is captured in these scales, and we grade them according to their thing. We also look at their cognitive functions in the UPDR scale. What is their memory functions? What is their executive functions? What is their depression scale? Because Parkinson's disease also can affect mood and can cause depression. So we also capture this. And as I said, 90% of patients do progress in various ways, various severity. Only 10% of the patients with Parkinson's disease remain mild. That means if they start with one hand tremors, they can continue to have only tremors after 10 years or 20 years. Otherwise, usually they progress. What I mean by progression is that, as I said initially, unilateral becomes bilateral. Then the midline symptoms start. They start, bending forwards. They can lose balance and then may fall. All that happens after 10 years, 15 years, despite being on treatment. And they also develop what is called motor complications. That means most of the people in the world now across the countries have access to medical treatment. The medical treatment, when I say the medications, which are effective in Parkinson's disease, mostly are available in most of the countries. Very few countries are probably still deprived of the standard drugs that are used in Parkinson's disease, be it levodopa, be it dopa agonist, be it the old generation anticholinergic drugs and all. So when on medications after 5 years or after 7 years, they develop motor complications. That means because these medications are very effective, be it levodopa, which is the standard of care, or the other drugs, when we use these medications, most of the symptoms come down. The tremors comes down, the slowness of movements, the rigidity, stiffness, what we say, they come down significantly. But over the years, the effectiveness of these medications reduces. That means what a person requires 3 or 4 doses of medications may require more frequent. That means the effect of the medication, what was to be 6 hours, 7 hours, the standard duration of action, comes down because there is changes in the receptors where these medications are affecting. So then the patient requires, the person with Parkinson's disease requires every 3 hours or 4 hours. That's called end of dose effect. So there are motor fluctuations. They require frequent doses. And as it progresses, the effect is not predictable. They become unpredictable. That means suddenly they become stiff, like they're walking in the park, or they're going to work in their offices, in the meetings, and suddenly they start developing tremors. It would have been not seen a year back or 2 years back, where they could sense the effect of the medication and then they plan it accordingly. They would have timed their meeting or activities of day-to-day activities according to the effect of the medicine. But suddenly they see that the effect takes longer to come and the effect is short-term. And suddenly they get into off stage where someone has to get them out of the chair, or they can't write, they can't sign. All that can happen. So that is motor complications. Other motor complication we see is also that when you take a medication, usually there's a good effect, But after certain years, this effect comes also with some side effects, like they develop involuntary movements. They can have this dancing type of movements, neck movements, head movements, and the hand goes backwards. So these are called dyskinetic movements. So that happens over the years. That's also part of the complication. Usually they are mild. The patients with this type of problem may not have any issues with that type of movements, but or some people do develop significant movements where they can lose balance, they can have difficulty in breathing because of so much of involuntary movements. So then we are forced to reduce the medications. So that goes on for a couple of years. Apart from this, they also can develop psychiatric side effects like hallucinations. They can imagine things which is untrue. They can have a lot of dreams in the sleep. They can disturb sleep. They can become psychotic with the medication. So what used to be a very like a called honeymoon period where they are very stable with the medications over the time, this starts happening. Most of the people, but not everyone will have all the problems. Some people will have fluctuations. They can have, some people will have more hallucinations. Some people will have more dyskinesias. So this is there's a complex motor complications and psychiatric complications, side effects happening in things. The more elderly they are, more like for example, as I said, it can happen in 60s, 70s also. More the elderly they are, you see much more cognitive problems. They develop memory issues. They develop, I think they are very sensitive medications. So a small, if you increase half a tablet of levodopa, they get side effects. So that needs very fine tuning of the doses. Requires close monitoring of these patients on medications.
Does it have any gender role here, or is it just going to be the age factor? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, various studies have shown that the male gender are more affected in Parkinson disease as compared to women, even in India. One thing could be that the women probably going to the doctor early on, getting medical treatment early on, may be little skewed in that way. In maybe in rural areas, in I think urban areas, I don't think it should not be an issue. In rural areas, access to medical facilities and recognizing the slowness and the tremors may be a little delayed. That may be effect, but no doubt the effect of hormones, that is estrogen, it has a protective effect on Parkinson disease. There is also a population-based study where they've shown that smoking has some protective effect on Parkinson disease. That also may be the reason, because we see much more smoking in males. So that may skew the prevalence, but overall there is a little slight increase in prevalence in male gender as compared to women.
Fine. So I wanted to ask, like, what is the mainstay of treatment in Parkinson disease? Like, how effective is medical treatment? You are talking about the drugs, right? So are regular follow-ups required? And if you could just talk about that.
Yeah. So let me go back to the history a little bit. James Parkinson's, who's an English physician, in fact surgeon, described this disease in 1817 in his famous essay of shaking palsy, essay on shaking palsy. He called it shaking palsy. Later, a lot of neurologists across the world, especially from France, described other features like bradykinesia, slowness, and then it became a full syndrome, completely described. And then we had neuropathological studies done in mid 90s, and then levodopa was discovered somewhere in 1960s, late 60s. So even after 50 years of discovery of levodopa, this still remains the standard of care. So levodopa is nothing but what happens in Parkinson disease is there's a dopaminergic deficiency. So it improved the life expectancy. So it improved all the symptoms, like the stiffness comes down, the slowness comes down, the tremors improves. So for 5-6 years, they do really well. Levodopa is the main drug what we use. Apart from that, there are other medications, as I mentioned, tricyclic antidepressants, which have been there for a long time. We also use a medication called amantadine. We also use the newer generation dopa agonist, ropinirole, pramipexole. There are a whole lot of medication we use in different stages of Parkinson disease. In younger people, we use much more antidepressants or like triacylphenidil. We use it so that we can delay the usage of levodopa, so that we can keep it a little longer, so that the motor complications can be delayed. So all in all, the medical treatment is very effective in Parkinson's. That is the most important message. they respond to the medications, relieve most of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. But after certain years, after 5 years, 7 years into the disease, they develop motor complications, which needs to be handled again with medications and all. So initially, for 5-6 years, medical treatment have a big role, and they usually respond very well. Even after they go for higher, advanced treatments like DBS and all, medications do have a role that is continued for life. So one important thing for the public to know is that the medications have to be taken for life. It has to be closely monitored because they can have side effects. Not every individual will have tolerance to all the medications. They can have simple intolerance like GI side effects like vomiting, nausea, vomiting initially itself. So then we use medications to suppress these things. And then once they tolerate well, they can continue them. Or if they don't tolerate at all, then we have to change the medications. Good thing is we have scope of using so many medications at different combinations in Parkinson's disease at various stages. So that way, medical treatment is very effective in Parkinson's disease. It relieves most of the symptoms and it improves the quality of life.
Welcome, Dr. Raghuram. The first question I would like to ask you is, what are the common symptoms of Parkinson's disease and how else does the patient present to the doctor? What are the non-motor symptoms, if you could just elucidate on that? Yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much for having us on ET World and creating this awareness on Parkinson's disease and its treatment. Coming to your question, the commonest symptoms of Parkinson's disease that many patients notice is tremors. That means shaking of the hand. So that has been one of the most commonest symptoms which patients are aware or their family members are aware, and then they come and report to the doctor. The other symptoms which are basically motor symptoms are slowness of movements. They notice that their family member is not being able to walk fast, or when they're eating, their hand movements have become very slow and they become very stiff. And sometimes when they have to turn or walk in crowded places, they find it very difficult. So these are some of the early and subtle signs of Parkinson's disease. In addition to that, coming to the specific point of non-motor symptoms. Non-motor symptoms, when we say, is symptoms that don't affect any movement. So the symptoms in Parkinson's which we see could be kind of a depression. Some people may get withdrawn because of the fact that they are not able to be active or be able to walk as they were able to do before. Some of them can have what is called as compulsive habits or an obsession, kind of an obsession disorder. Like they may get involved in things which they would never probably have done in all their life, something like gambling, or some people may go on, doing some events which like maybe running or doing betting or stealing something. So some of these things can be a rare motor symptom that you can see in Parkinson's disease. The most important thing is these patients were absolutely normal all throughout their life, and suddenly the family members notice that they are dealing these problems. And they can also have speech problems after a part of motor symptom. That means the speech voice has become low. They're not able to speak as clearly as they were able to do before. And their handwriting has changed, especially in patients who are retired and who are dealing with banks as a routine. We see many patients coming to us and saying that my handwriting is changed, doctor. My signature is not accepted by the bank. That is the first sign that I noticed. And then subsequently, the other symptoms develop. Usually, most of the symptoms start on one side and then progress and go on to the other side. That's also another feature of Parkinson's disease.
So, going on, I would like to ask you, doctor, how do you investigate Parkinson's disease? Can you predict its progression or investigations? If you could touch on that.
Parkinson's disease is primarily a clinical diagnosis. When I say clinical diagnosis, I mean that the disease is primarily diagnosed by a treating physician or a neurologist who examines the patient. If you ask me, is there a blood test, sir, or a CT scan or an MRI which can tell me whether I have Parkinson's? As of now, there is no one single test or one single scan or one single device which we can check and say that the patient has Parkinson's disease. Most of the time, like I already told you, the constellation of symptoms in a particular patient and is what we will guide us to come to a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. So patients who is elderly or sometimes even young patients having tremors, having stiffness of limbs, having speech problem, having difficulty in walking fast, all these symptoms put together help us in coming to a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. In a few patients, there are some specific scans that we can do. And these are also not confirmatory. They're only an adjunctive test or an extra test which can confirm that the patient has Parkinson's disease. So one of them is what is called as a DOPA scan. Like we already know, in Parkinson's disease, what happens is the amount of dopamine in the body has reduced, and especially in a particular area in the brain called as the substantia nigra, which is in the center of the brain. So when we do this scan, after injecting this particular medicine dopamine into them, we find that there is a decreased uptake or a decreased production in this area. So this is the only test which can be an adjunctive test, but definitely not a definitive test to say that this is Parkinson's disease and confirm it. Primarily, it's a diagnosis which the doctor will make after checking you thoroughly.
Fine. So we don't have any one test which we can do for Parkinson's disease.
Correct.
Fine. The surgical options, if you can talk about in Parkinson's disease, how do you select the patients for the same? Does it have any steps? Yes, Dr. Raghuram.
Yeah. Initially, the treatment for Parkinson's disease is definitely medical therapy. Dr. Guru Prasad in his discussion has already elaborated the various types of medical therapy that is available in India. There is a stage in Parkinson's disease when the medicines do not have the kind of effect that they had in the beginning of the disease. And they also start to produce side effects because of the medicines. What happens is when the patients are not getting benefit because of the medicine, we tend to increase the doses of the medicines. And as we go on increasing the dose, we start seeing the side effects because of the medicines. The side effects can be in the form of abnormal twitching of the neck or abnormal movement of the neck, or some patients not able to tolerate it, having vomiting, stomach pain, and some of them having even very severe dry mouth, difficulty in passing urine. So once they have severe side effects and once they don't have adequate duration of response, in Parkinson's disease, when the patient has a good response to medication, that is called as the on phase. And when the medication effect goes away and the patient has all the difficulty in moving and having tremors, that phase is called as the off phase. So when we select patients for surgical treatment, we see how long the patient is getting an on by medication alone. As the disease progresses, the duration of effect of this medicine, giving them a good on or a good independent active life, reduces as the disease progresses. So that is the stage when we think of offering them surgical options. So in terms of surgery, the most commonest and widely performed procedure and with significant scientific evidence is what is called as deep brain stimulation or DBS of the brain. What do we do in DBS? Basically is the whole of the brain works on an electrical current or an electrical circuit. So in this procedure, what is called as the deep brain stimulation, we insert 2 electrodes into a very specific area in the brain, which is called as the subthalamic nucleus. This is a very, very small area in the brain, about 5 into 7 millimeter in length and width. And it has to be very specifically targeted, and the electrode has to be kept in the right place. Once we do that, what was the electrical circuit which had become abnormal because of Parkinson gets corrected, and these electrodes are actually connected with an extension wire which is tunneled under the skin, and a pacemaker is placed just below the collarbone. Like the pacemaker for the heart, this pacemaker is the pacemaker for the brain. So once the pacemaker is switched on, the abnormal electrical activity that was happening in the brain gets corrected, and the patient starts seeing very good response in terms of control of tremor, their activity becoming much more easier, the speed of walking getting better. Is there any particular person who is not fit for surgery? Yes, there are some patients who are not fit for surgery. Not all Parkinson's patients are a candidate. So we have to evaluate. There are some syndromes of Parkinson's which are like Parkinson, but not only pure Parkinson's. Patients who are having fall, who are having memory issues. So there is a detailed clinical evaluation that is done before any patient is offered surgery. And once that detailed clinical evaluation confirms that this particular patient will benefit from surgery, then only we select the patient for surgery. And the whole surgery is an awake surgery. The first surgery, when we put these electrodes deep into the brain, is the time when the neurologist is also in the OT. The patient is kept awake, but has no pain, but is aware that some activity is going on. And once we insert these electrodes, we give a trial current and then check whether the response is adequate. And once we confirm that the patient has a very good or an optimal response, we put the final electrode.
Very interesting. Okay, so going on, I would like to ask Dr. Guru Prasad, like, what is the neurologist's role in DPS, like, for Parkinson disease? As Dr. Raghuram had said, a neurologist is a must when the DPS process is going on, procedure is going on. And also, if you can elaborate on how is the post-operation programming and adjustment of medications is done after the surgery, and what difference does it make in a patient's life? Yeah, and also I wanted to ask, like, how do you select a person? Yet say, elaborated, Dr. Agram had elaborated, but if you can just put on these points and give us an insight, please.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, Parkinson disease is a complex disease. For handle any complex disease, you need a big team of doctors, team of therapists like physiotherapist, occupational therapist. In certain they have a what is something called PD nurse, where there's a trained nurse, to look after these patients during their OPD visits or inpatients, various when they're admitted for various issues, various other non-Parkinson disease reasons. So when you have a complex disease, you need that type of expertise, team of experts to handle this. So neurologist, because when the disease starts in any individual, it is very easy to start on medications and all. But as the disease progresses, the various aspects join in. So motor, non-motor problems start in. So the neurologist is the one who follows up them regularly. We see it every 3 months, 6 months, sometimes as early as early as 1 month. So we follow them up very regularly. So as a neurologist or a movement disorder specialist, we are the one who need to identify such potential patients who will benefit with advanced therapies like deep brain stimulation. So the eligibility of a Parkinson disease going for advanced treatment like Parkinson disease is mainly done by neurologist in consultation with a neurosurgeon. Ultimately, it's in a surgery. We need to know whether the patient is fit for surgery. He has any other comorbids. He's on any medications we need to alter before the surgery. So that's the first step. So identifying the eligibility, whether this patient is fit for surgery, he's okay to, he will benefit with surgery, stands on the neurologist. Having said that, then we need to know whether he will benefit. So the obvious question the patients and their family will ask is how much will he benefit? How much will this patient benefit? Do all Parkinson disease require deep brain stimulation? As I said, 90% of patients progress. So in fact, then you mean that all patients will benefit. But there are, across the age group, for example, usually we restrict these procedures only for age till the age of 70 years. Above 70 years, we're very choosy. We usually avoid because they can have cognitive issues, they can have dementia starting early, along with Parkinson disease. So those are not candidates, ideal candidates for deep brain stimulation surgery. So, and apart from that, there are certain Parkinson disease mimics or something called atypical Parkinson disease, where initially they may look very similar to Parkinson disease, but they behave differently. Their prognosis, and that means their progression is different. They don't respond well to medications, very little initially, but later they don't respond. And they are not the candidates for deep brain stimulation. So we need to identify the right candidates. And then we do what is called levodopa challenge. Even after certain years of Parkinson disease, the response to the medications is very good. If they respond well, they may have problems with the medications, but they have to respond, at least show good response to levodopa. So we do what is called levodopa challenge test. So once we do prove that they have a good response, they are the ones who do well to surgery. So we need to do certain things before we go ahead for surgery. And as Dr. Raghuram said, once we select the patients and then they go for surgery, we assess them intra-op. We do what is called MER, microelectrode recording. That is, we are physiologically mapping the nucleus. And even while planning the target and thing, we work as a team. We are always with the neurosurgeons, and we do MER recording, physiological mapping of the nucleus. Then we do assessment on macrostimulation as the current is given inside the OT, testing the stimulation. We will be assessing whether the response is good, what are the side effects if the current goes up. All that is done. And then post-op, we usually don't start the stimulation very early. We wait for some time, let the post-op changes settle down, and then we start programming, starting with a very minimal current, and then we go up. So there are various parameters we we can use in various combinations to get the best out of the stimulation. So we generally look at the frequency, pulse width, the amplitude of the current, and there are various devices available in the market. Depending on what device we use, we have various contacts available. We can use various, there are 4 contacts on each side. So we use different contacts to deliver the current, and we select the best possible parameters which gives the best effect with the less side effects. So the initial programming takes at least a month and 2 to settle down. Once they settle down, their hospital visits may not be required so frequently. The initially couple of visits post-op, and then once they settle down, then we start reducing their medications. Usually, the average reduction in medications by 50% pre-op. If they are on 6 tablets of levodopa, we expect at the end of 3 months or 6 months, it comes down to 3 tablets. So average 50% reduction. A lot of other medications which are used pre-op comes down substantially. So the advantage of DBS is, one thing is the reduction of a lot of symptoms related to Parkinson's disease, be it tremors, slowness, and all. And the fluctuations, what I mentioned pre-op, related to use of medications and progression of the disease, comes down significantly with deep brain stimulation. So what happens to the patient is the quality of life improves. That means they can plan. In a layman's term, we are pushing the disease 3 years or 4 years behind. So he is now what it was 4 years back. So the disease can be predicted because the stimulation in the background, so there's a lot of not fluctuations. The medicine requirement comes down. The related side effects comes down. So they are much more stable now.
Okay. Is there any age factor involved in the surgery, if at all?
As I mentioned, usually above the age of 70, we are very careful because they have other comorbids, like especially cognitive issues, memory issues, or they can have other issues like spine issues where that may make them difficult in walking. They may have knee problems. So we want a situation where once they're operated, they're much more agile to walk. They can be independent. If anything is contributing towards reducing the quality of life post-op, or difficulty in handling, because after all it's an awake surgery, they have to be cooperating for at least 6 to 7 hours of surgical time. We all look at all these things. The more the elder they are, the chances of them coping up with those things becomes down. So usually there is an arbitrary line we draw at the age of 70, that below 70 we are much more comfortable taking them up for these procedures.
Thanks, Doctor, for that good insights. I would like to ask Dr. Raghuram, what is your experience with DBS for Parkinson's disease in your center, and how has the technology improvised over the years? If you can touch upon the technology side of DBS.
Yeah. So we have been doing DBS for more than 10 years now. So ours has been one of the centers all over India, which has been consistently doing deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease. And primarily, we have done Parkinson's disease in addition to other movement disorders. Also, we have treated. So as the technology evolves, I think that is another very important question which many patients keep asking. How has technology evolved over a period of time? So from what we started 10 years ago to what we are seeing today, there is a lot of advancement both in the electrodes as well as in the kind of device or the pacemaker that we call as an IPG, which is an internal programmer, pulse generating device. So there is technology in terms of electrode. Is what has happened is normally what we have is a full contact electrode or a device which gives electrode all around, electric current all around it. So that's what was the previous type of electrode that we had. Now we have an electrode which is a full circle divided into 3 half circles, 3 equal circles. So what happens is we have placed the electrode, we start giving the current, and when we give current in the full contact electrode, the electrode goes all around that area of the place where the electrode is in the brain. And some patients may have side effects when it goes to an area which is not of an optimal benefit in patients with Parkinson's. Some patients can have stiffness of hands, some patients can have speech disturbance. So when this kind of an effect happens, so what we normally do when we put an electrode which has got a full circle contact is we try to change the contact point. Usually they have 4 contact points on either side. So totally there will be 8 contact points in an electrode in a patient where we have put it on both sides. So we try to move it either up or down and then try to reduce the side effects and improve the beneficial effects. Whereas in the second type of electrode that I told you, in which a full circle is divided into 3 equal circles, we can choose one half of that or 1/3 of that circle to give the current, which is called as a directional lead. So in which we can direct the current towards the area which produces the beneficial effect compared to a side which is producing a side effect. So that is the advantage in terms of electrode technology that has evolved. The other thing that has evolved in terms of electrode technology is, in addition to giving current, these electrodes also start recording activity of the brain. This electrode is presently available in India, in which it records the activity of the brain. And that can give us a feedback, like when Dr. Guru was already telling you about post-op programming. So when we record activity in the brain, when the electrode is in place, and then when we see it, when they come for follow-up, we know at what point during the day this particular patient had an abnormal electrical current, and then we can reprogram our IPG or the pacemaker accordingly, and that will help. So these are the things that have changed in terms of the electrode or the contact. In terms of the pacemaker or the IPG that I was telling you, we have many devices now, starting from what is called as a rechargeable device and a non-rechargeable device. A rechargeable device is like any other mobile phone. Basically, what you have to do is you have an external remote, which you don't have to really, it's like a communicates with infrared like your TV remote, but much smaller, or some of them even have it on an app. So you take that, go near your battery and analyze your battery. If your charge is coming down, it will show you in terms of an icon as well as an absolute percentage. And if you feel your charge is coming down, then there is a device which is like a belt, which you just wear it over your pacemaker and then charge it. On an average, the patient usually charge about once a week or once in 2 weeks. So this is a rechargeable device. And when you have a rechargeable device, the battery life obviously becomes much longer. So you have a rechargeable device with battery lives of 10 years and another rechargeable device with the battery life even up to 25 years. So that is the kind of technological improvements that we have seen in IPG with rechargeable device. The other group of devices are what is called as non-rechargeable device. When I say non-rechargeable, that means this battery is fully charged, like your regular, say, any battery that you use in your Duracell or whatever you use, which is you just insert the pacemaker and that keeps running throughout its entire life. There is no need for you to go on checking whether the battery is charged or not. Usually, for the lifespan that usually it is designed, it works continuously day and night. So this rechargeable device, now we have a battery which can last up to 5 to 6 years, and some of them can last even up to 7 to 8 years. So that is the kind of technological advancement that we are seeing. In terms of programming platform, programming is what Dr. Guru already explained, that is adjusting the current, frequency, amplitude, and multiple things that we can do to make sure that, like, the bottom goal in all this programming is to make sure that the patient gets a good benefit and less side effect. There is so much of an advancement because of technology with multiple parameter change that we can do in all the devices that are available.
Fine. So when we speak about technology, next comes the research. You have to ask Dr. Guru Prasad, are there any more options for Parkinson's disease? Is there any new research happening in this field? What to expect in the future? If you can touch upon that, yeah.
Yeah. So DBS now is a very standard of care across the world for advanced Parkinson's disease. Along with that, there are two more advanced therapies which are available. One is available in India now, which is called apomorphine pump. Apomorphine has been one of the oldest drugs known to neurologists and physicians, used for other things, but it has now come back for use in Parkinson's disease, because apomorphine has a very good anti-Parkinson effect, and is the only injectable available for use in Parkinson's disease. Only thing is, it's effective only for 90 minutes whenever you give a bolus injection of apomorphine. So we do what is called apomorphine challenge, and if they respond well in advanced Parkinson's disease, if they we try this and they do respond well, less of side effects, because it can cause a lot of vomiting sensation and all. We prime them with antiemetics and then give them these shots. If they respond well, and then depending on how much injections they require per day, we can regulate that and then put them onto pump. So that's available now in India for the last 2-3 years now. That's one therapy which is available. The other is Duodopa. The motor fluctuation, which I was mentioning earlier, one of the complications happens in in the due course in Parkinson's disease, happens because of the pulse rate stimulation of the dopamine receptors in the brain. That is because of the changes in the gut as well. To overcome that, we use special gel form of levodopa. It's delivered directly into the gut, so that it stimulates, the pulsatile stimulation is overcome, and it has a continuous effect on the dopa receptors, and the effect is much more stable and continuous. So the Duodopa is still not available. It's very expensive. It's only seen used more in European countries. So that's one advanced therapy available. A lot of funding has happened in last 2 decades for research in Parkinson's disease. We have a lot of new drugs coming in. I was also part of a multinational trial for in Parkinson's disease, a drug called cefinamide, which is now in market, which again is used in advanced Parkinson's disease to reduce these fluctuations and dyskinesias. And there are various other forms of drug delivery which is made available for levodopa. Like we have sublingual levodopa. Someone who can take orally has a lot of intolerance for levodopa, a lot of vomiting sensation, dyspepsia and all. For them, sublingual levodopa is being made available. Nasal thing where we want a quick effect. There is a delayed on. We can have nasal levodopa being available. So all these are things, and a lot of new drugs are also in the pipeline. And for other non-motor symptoms, for someone who's got Parkinson's disease related psychosis, for them we have new drugs which are being made available. So good thing is there's a lot of research happening. A lot of new drugs are being coming. There's also ongoing research for stem cell in Parkinson's disease. Multinational trials are going on. The trial results are not out yet. So probably in next couple of years, we may have results happening. But there's a lot of use of stem cell without proper scientific evidence happening across the country, in our country, which is not right. Because without clinical evidence, without scientific evidence, if something is being misused, that's not right, because it's not safe, and we don't know what is the next thing happening because of the misuse of this stem cells thing. So that's what the right now we stand in terms of research.
Okay. So I would like to ask, what was the impact of COVID in Parkinson's patients, both physically and mentally? If both of you could just give us some insight on that. Dr. Raghuram, if you could go first, please.
I think all of us have had experience with treating COVID patients with other diseases now, because the past 2 years has been quite an experience for everybody in all fields of medicine. So Parkinson's in particular, patients can have worsening. I'm sure Dr. Guru can throw more light on it. They can have worsening of their symptoms because of so many other changes that happen whenever there is a COVID infection. The basic symptoms of Parkinson's, like stiffness, speech problem, drowsiness, many things set in. Low sodium itself can cause a problem in Parkinson's patients. And we have had patients who have come to us, Parkinson's patients who have had COVID and come, and we have treated them. And it takes quite a while, especially the mental symptoms or the non-motor symptoms. The patients with Parkinson's are already quite, tend to have depression because they feel that they're not doing what they could do prior, and their place in society is being judged by many people. If they have tremors, many people are very, very anxious. They don't go out to any kind of a social gathering because of that. And in addition to this, COVID and stress of COVID has made sure that nobody can go out and everybody has to stay indoors. And all of this has definitely added to their mental disturbance also. I think Dr. Guru can add much more information on that.
So that way, COVID has impacted, Parkinson's disease in a big way. One thing is, as Dr. Raghuram said, who already have Parkinson's disease, who needs to be, because one of the main, non-pharmacological intervention, what we do in Parkinson's disease is regular exercises, outdoor exercises or indoor exercises. So people who are used to regular walking outdoors, that has been impacted significantly. So their physical activity has a thing. So what it means that their Parkinson's disease progresses more faster. But someone who's got Parkinson's disease and has COVID pneumonia, because their tidal volumes, because of the stiffness, their vital capacity comes anyway is limited, especially in advanced Parkinson's disease people. So the recovery that takes that much time. So definitely has a bearing in the recovery when they have affected with COVID. So we lost a couple of patients who had advanced Parkinson's disease, even with the DBS, without DBS, because of probably the interaction with that. Some of the medication what we use in COVID, like cough syrups, some of the drugs used also have some interaction with medication which are used in Parkinson's disease. That is one thing, but it's not a big thing. Important is because of the nature of the disease, which affects muscles all across, because the stiffness of the chest cavity and all, that can have effect. Another thing is because of the travel restrictions, people couldn't travel, couldn't come follow up. So we managed quite a number of patients with Parkinson's disease using technology, telemedicine. So we could give regular consults to them. We could manage programming even on video conferencing. We could manage that, but some of them who would not have access to that type of thing were deprived of that. So there was also a lag in terms of reaching out. Medications also had a problem because because of the restrictions of transport and all. Some of them had difficulty in getting medications things. So that was also an impact. Some of the, because we operate on both our own patients from our own city, across the country and abroad. So because of the international restrictions on international travel, a lot of patients who are waiting for deep brain stimulation also could not come for their surgeries, planned surgeries. And some of the patients who had their battery worn out could not come for battery replacements because of the travel restrictions. So in a way, COVID had a major bearing on management of Parkinson's disease. But yes, but I think God and I think has given so much of spirit and the motivation that we could overcome the first wave and second wave. Hopefully, we stay like that, safe like that.
Yeah. I would also like to ask, like, what is the importance of lifestyle changes like exercises? You had touched upon a bit on it, the diet and the sleep, etc. on Parkinson's disease. Dr. Guruprasad, if you could take that up. Yeah.
Parkinson's disease, affects in various ways. Not only just our motor movements, affects our sleep, our mood, physical activity, planning, execution, and all. So apart from medications, we always encourage our patients to be physically active, as simple as walking at least for half an hour to 1 hour daily. And if they can do much more, like playing some games, if they're interested, like some of the patients play basketball, badminton, we encourage them to continue so that they're physically agile. And we ask them to limit sedentary lifestyle, because the more they are sedentary, the chances of getting stiff joints, stiffness in their limbs becomes more, and they require much more medications and then the related side effects. So lifestyle changes in terms of being physically active is the most important thing. And also we encourage them to be relaxed as much as possible, not get into stressful thing, plan their day in a way that they have time for everything, for extracurricular activities, and also get good adequate sleep. Sleep is significantly affected in Parkinson's disease. We manage without medication as much as possible, but sometimes if they have a lot of REM sleep related issues, behavioral issues, dream enactment, they get out of the beds, they have a lot of involuntary movements. We have to sometimes use medications to calm them and have at least 6 to 7 hours of sleep. And they have constipation, so we encourage them to take a lot of fiber, liquids, if it is permissible, and if it is not improving, we sometimes use medications like laxatives or stool softeners to improve their motions. They can also have urinary issues. They can also overlap with because they're elderly, they can have prostate issues. So we take consults from the specialists like urologists to make sure that nothing else is contributing towards their urinary problems, and then use appropriate measures to minimize the urinary urgency or precipitancy or incontinence.
Finally, would like to ask both of your what is your message to patients, and more importantly, their caregivers and relatives, friends of patients with Parkinson's disease and society at large? What kind of message you have to give them? If you can give 3 or 4 pointers, it would be easier. Yeah, Dr. Raghuram, please.
Yeah, so I think that's a very, very important question. One of the most important things that many patients think as soon as they get Parkinson's is that, oh God, I got a degenerative disease, or their caregivers get extremely worried that it's a degenerative disease, is going to go down, nothing can be done. He just has to be cooped inside his house and he can't do anything anymore. That's not true anymore. We have so much of advanced treatments, and in the past 1 hour, all of that which we have discussed have shown tremendous response and have very, very valid scientific evidence backing them, whether it is DBS or in terms of newer therapies which Dr. Guru Prasad spoke to you. So there is definite hope and treatment for Parkinson's disease. It's not like something that we can cure or reverse it, but we can definitely make sure that the quality of life that a patient with Parkinson's can be significantly improved, at least to an extent that they can lead an independent life. We have had extreme examples when patients who are young have had Parkinson's disease and then they've undergone DBS. And when you see them or the kind of activity that they do, they go swimming, they go on long road trips, they do trekking, they drive two-wheelers, you can't even make out. So that's the kind of response and that you get to treatment when you are diagnosed early and you are given appropriate treatment. Not like every patient needs DBS, but definitely that's another added technological and a surgical advantage that has helped us in improving the quality of life of these patients. And definitely for the caregiver. Imagine giving care to somebody who cannot walk, who needs support to go to the bathroom, who needs support to eat, who cannot keep anything in his mouth because of the tremor. So when you control all these symptoms, or at least improve them to an extent that that particular individual can do all these activities on its own, there is a significant improvement in the quality of life of the whole family. So that is the important message. Please do not feel hopeless or let down or depressed. There are definite treatment which can significantly improve the quality of life and also probably slow down the speed of progression, if not cure it.
Over to you, Dr.
Yeah, adding to the points of what Dr. Raghuram has said, there's no specific etiology for Parkinson's disease. Age is the only risk factor. Maybe there may be some genetic factors, especially if there is a young onset Parkinson's disease in the family. There can be a little additional risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Otherwise, there's no other reason or there other etiology for developing Parkinson's disease. So the best thing to adopt for lay people, general public, is to be regular in your physical activity, regular walks, good diet, good sleep. So if you maintain your lifestyle very healthy in a healthy way, so you can avoid developing Parkinson's disease or degenerative conditions like dementia and all. Having said that, it's a long journey. Once a patient's diagnosed or have Parkinson's disease, it's a long journey for the patient himself, for the family. So we usually counsel them in the beginning itself. Importance of taking medications regularly, regular follow-ups. Goes without saying. It's like diabetes or hypertension. Once you're diagnosed, you need to be monitored. Here, there's no blood test or there's no other way we monitor them. We monitor them clinically. We see them, physically examine them, and see what's the response to medications and adjust the medications. So clinical examination and monitoring is the most important thing, where the patient should understand that it's a lifelong battle, lifelong challenge. So they have to be compliant with the medication. The most important thing, what a person will help himself when they develop Parkinson's disease, is to follow the advice of the doctor, of the specialist, to regularly follow up with them and be compliant with the medications. If they don't do, we have seen multiple times, they take it for 6 months, they don't come for a follow-up, they would have stopped the medications because they do well and they feel that the disease is gone. In spite of telling them that this is a long-term treatment, they need to be. So that has to go. The compliance has to improve. Once that happens, we can have a predictable course. We can always plan, because the planning is not just about taking care of the patients. I think they also need to plan financially. If they're working, what happens 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, about their insurance, because all the therapies, what we mentioned, advanced therapies, are expensive. So they need to plan their things. So if you, follow it rigorously, the follow-ups plan your, life for 5 years, 10 years, then you can have a very smooth sail. Otherwise, if you are not regularly following up and all, then it becomes difficult for a treating physician also to anticipate what will happen in the future and think. So, and also important to be positive as much as possible. As Dr. Raghuram said, hope is the most important thing. So we need to keep our life going on professionally, personally. We need to take help when required. Because sometimes we try to avoid help, assistance, then you can land up with multiple falls, injuries and all. So when help is required, we need to arrange in such a way that family, the whole family is comfortable, and carry on with things. So the positivity is very important, because the treatment availability is quite good in our country now. We have all the technology which are developed, anywhere in the world, made available within few months or a year in India now. So the access to healthcare right now is very good. So I would urge, the society as well as the people with Parkinson's disease, the caregivers, to make best use of the available medical treatment and surgical treatment, and we can definitely improve the quality of life to the maximum. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to both the doctors here who have come out, taking from their time from their busy schedule. Yes, Parkinson's disease is a complex disease, and maintaining a good, healthy lifestyle matters a lot. So thanks a lot, Dr. Raghuram and Dr. Guru Prasad, coming here and giving your thoughts and insights. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.